Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the first of our free talks as part of Archaeology Scotland's contribution to European Archaeology Days. This is a Europe-wide festival which is taking place between the 13th and 15th of June. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our speaker today, which is Kenneth McElroy from the Caithness Broch project. So he's a director and co-founder of that project. And he's going to talk to us today about Brochs in Scotland and also the ambitious plans that the project has for the future. Okay, so I'll just pass over to you, Ken.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Hello, everybody. Whether you're from Scotland or from the furthest reaches of Europe, hello, and welcome to a wee Broch talk from Europe for European Archaeology Days. It's a pleasure to be here. Just make sure that's there we go. So my name is Kenneth McElroy, and I have been doing talks like these now for roughly a decade. So I really should be semi-decent at it now, I hope. But I'll try and rush through this as quickly as possible. Roughly take about an hour, I think. But I started doing these talks when we founded the Broch project, roughly 2013, late 2013. Here's a picture from 2013 when I started delivering these presentations back when I was young, slim, not grey or silver or white or whatever colour my hair is now, and idealistic as well. So there's been a lot of changes in the last decade or so, but it's still a pleasure to deliver talks to those who are interested in Brochs. Just to make you aware, it's not just myself involved with the project. I co-founded the project in 2013 with my colleague Ian on the right-hand side there. If nothing else, we have great taste in Ganseys. That's jumpers, by the way, in Scots. There are lots of people involved with the Caithness Broch project, though, and they're spread out all over the UK. Our ex-chairman is actually based in Warrington at the moment, and we have a number of volunteers who all help in their own way. So I'm very grateful for their assistance. Our current chairman, Pete, is in Glasgow, but he's moving back up soon as well. So really great to have them all on board and so industrious and enthusiastic. So big thanks to all of them, of course. A little bit about me. I've always been interested in archaeology. At this point, I usually ask the crowd or the audience where this is, but I think that just turns into a bit of a shouting match on Zoom. So I'll just tell you that here I am, aged roughly 7 or 8 in Skara Brae. But for some strange reason, I am wearing an England rugby top, which is a cruel and unusual punishment. Safe to say that I do support the Scottish rugby team now, now that they're kind of half decent anyway. So not sure why I've worn that. Latterly, I would kind of refine my interest in heritage and archaeology, joining Wick Heritage Museum in 2012, I believe it was. If you ever are in Wick, I highly recommend a visit to Wick Heritage Museum. It's really quite something. It's a fantastic place to visit. But as any millennial does, as soon as they do something vaguely charitable, they post about it online, on Facebook, on social media. And so I did that. And when I did, I was met with a barrage of comments, including, is that your twin, Ken? Is the haircut compulsory? You look like triplets. And here, Kenny, Donald Trump wants his hair back. So let that be a lesson to you for anyone thinking about posting online. Always think twice. Moving on from then, in 2015, I went on to do a wee bit of work in Orkney with Orkney Museums and Museums Gallery Scotland. I was able to participate in a number of archaeological excavations for the first time. Here I am at the Ness of Brodgar with a particularly interesting piece of grooveware pottery dating back to the kind of early Bronze Age, Neolithic age. Coincidentally, when I moved to Orkney, it was voted the most romantic place in the UK. So whether that's coincidence or not, I do not know. Going on from then, I've been able to excavate in a number of places, such as Kosovo, here at Dresnik, which I was able to find a really beautiful example of a fibula brooch, kind of probably worn by someone quite high up in the Roman military. And then earlier last year, I was in Alaska at Nunalak, which was the most amazing experience with the most incredible rate of preservation. So we found some really fantastic artifacts dating back to about 500 years, so well preserved in the permafrost. Really interesting site, so I'd recommend investigating Nunalak as well. Ian, at this point, when my colleague Ian, when he delivers this talk, he says that he's been involved in this project for so long that he's lost all of his hair. So that's Ian's little introduction. But we're talking about the Caithness Broch project today, and why we have been pointing at inconspicuous mounds for over 10 years now. So first of all, we will start with what is a broch? Well, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the term broch. Some of you may be well versed in brochs. This might be your first broch experience, in which case I'm delighted to discuss a little bit about these fantastic structures. We're going to go back to the Iron Age, the British Iron Age, which is roughly 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago to 2,000 years ago. So roughly about the time of the Roman invasion of Britain. And Broch origins, here's a slide which I gleefully stole from my time at Glasgow University, because it's a really useful slide. Broch origins, Brochs were once surmised to have actually been an introduction to Scotland. Some posited that they were introduced by Vikings and that they were known as Danes' towers. They were also erroneously known as Pictish towers as well, or Picts towers, which would attribute a much later date to their origin. Brochs, like I say, are roughly 2,500 to 2,000 years old, a little bit before the Picts, which are normally associated with the early medieval period, 4th to the 10th century or so. But Brochs essentially grew out of a vernacular tradition of building round houses in Scotland, in the northern Scotland especially. The Bronze Age tradition of building large timber round houses, such as Kilfedder here, really quite monumentally constructed structures. These are huge structures, which then developed or evolved into much more substantial structures. By the time you get to about sort of 2000 BC to around about AD 100, you're getting the zenith of Broch building and the Brochs that you might be more familiar with. But just so that you know, Brochs are endemic to Scotland. They are like an entirely Scottish, if you like, construction. And of course, let's be aware that there was no such thing as Scotland back then. But they are endemic to that area of the world. And they grew out of an already pre-existing tradition of building circular houses, circular structures. So from the Bronze Age, what we'll find there in the archaeological record is we will find things like post holes, we'll find foundations, we'll find different layers of or kind of levels of turf in the landscape, and these are usually found in the landscape as hut circles, and you'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of these in Scotland, all throughout Scotland actually. And they may have looked something like that on the right. So that's a wattle and daub with a huge thatched structure. We're not terribly sure how they might have looked, but gives you an idea that these are large circular buildings which we were building in the Bronze Age 3,000 years ago. And you might call these a simple Atlantic roundhouse, but this is a term coined by Ian Armitt, who is kind of one of the most foremost experts on Brochs and Broch building. Simple Atlantic roundhouses actually grew out of the tradition of hut circles. These are slightly more monumental structures built with stone. And a really great example of that can be found in Orkney, or was found in Orkney. This is Boo Broch, excavated maybe about 40, 45 years ago. And you can see here that the walls are much more than kind of wattle and daub structures or turf structures. These are 5-meter thick walls. And you can see a number of kind of stone material in the centre as well, kind of stone furniture, if you like, kind of outlining different rooms, different kind of features. But the walls are the main story here. They are building really impressive, really thick structures. And this gives us our kind of earliest Broch, if you like, if this is how you might term a Broch. We'll come to that in a little bit. Terminology and what we actually find on the ground might vary depending on who you ask. We're not going to go too in the weeds of that today. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing an evolution in building structures from the kind of simple Bronze Age, still large structures, to much more monumental, built with stone structures, which we might call the simple Atlantic roundhouses. And following on from that tradition, we move into something called complex Atlantic roundhouses. And guess what? These are a bit like simple Atlantic roundhouses, just more complex. And I'll show you that through a cross-section here of Crosskirk Broch. This is a really important Broch in Caithness. again, actually was an important Broch in Caithness, for reasons I'll discuss in a moment. But as you can see here, the excavations in 1966, led by Dr. Horace Fairhurst, and again in the mid-1970s, they revealed a structure which is much more complex in nature than what we might find at Broch. And you can see that there are obviously entrances, but there's a staircase now. There's a staircase running through this Broch. And this provides the Broch with a gallery. It actually provides the Broch with two separate walls. This is a feature which is so particular to Brochs. You'll also find structures such as cells have been built into the Broch. We'll come into that in a little bit as well. You'll find ladders, you'll find door checks, you'll find lots of kind of structures in the interior as well, which aren't actually marked there, but lots of kind of secondary walling as well. So a really interesting site, and it's again just to sort of demonstrate the fact that Brochs are becoming much more complex in their architecture. Now, Crosskirk Broch is really interesting, I think, because from a kind of sociological point of view, it's perhaps one of the few Brochs which were excavated by US Navy men in the 1970s at the height of the Cold War. I really like this quote from All Hands magazine, which is the Navy magazine for the American Armed Forces. In a word, the duty is different. It's one of the few places where a Navy man will have the opportunity to participate in an archaeological dig. So, really important Broch. Sadly, that Broch was then summarily demolished and pushed off the edge of the cliff for reasons which we aren't still completely clear why they did this. Possibly health and safety, which did exist back in the 70s, but that is a great loss, if you ask me, to Caithness archaeology. But moving on, Broch towers are the zenith, the pinnacle of Iron Age architecture and of the Broch building vernacular tradition. And this might provide you with some examples of the Brochs which you might be more familiar with, such as Musa Broch here on your screen, which can be found on the island of Musa. And it is ultimately the best example of a Broch that we have in Scotland. It's a truly spectacular Iron Age monument. It may be the finest prehistoric monument on the British Isles, actually. But this is sort of around about the sort of 2000 BC to 100 AD. This is when we start to see the really finest Brochs being constructed. So Brochs like Duntrodden or Duntelve here on the right, these are really quite fine examples. But there are some features there of the Broch here, which I've mentioned the double walls, and you can see the double wall here on Duntrodden. You can see the gallery that I mentioned, which a staircase ran through. And it would have gone up certainly to the first floor, perhaps to the second floor. Musa is somewhat different, and I love the quote from Dr. Noel Foja of Shetland University, Shetland UHI. He always reminds us that yes, Musa is a Broch, but not every Broch is a Musa. Now the staircase in Musa goes all the way to the top, all the way to the wall head, but that doesn't seem to be the case for the other Brochs which exist above the first floor. Duntrodden, Duntelve, Duncarloway, etc. These all eventually taper up to the top, or rather the two walls eventually sort of meet at the top, sort of preventing any access to the wall head. And we must also remember that Musa was somewhat transformed during the Victorian era, so it has seen some conservation undertaken there. So it's difficult to interpret if every Broch would have had a staircase to the top. But certainly we have double walls, which in the case of Musa, up to around about 40 feet high. These are like skyscrapers. These are properly impressive structures. We must remember this is 2,000 years ago when most of the UK, most of the British Isles were hut circles, were kind of much simpler constructions. The Brochs were seriously impressive. And that's maybe why they were built. They were perhaps built to impress. So I've mentioned there the staircases as well, which run through the Broch structure, providing you with what's known as the gallery. But you'll also find things like cells, and I also find these quite a slightly misleading term. You think of a prison cell, but it's important to see how they were kind of built within the Broch walling itself. They're building into the wall. It's like building into your cavity or your insulation of your own house. But remember, these are really thick walls, so they could actually build structures into the walls themselves. Best way to think about them is like beehive cells, which you might have seen yourself in the likes of Skellig Islands there on the bottom right. That's the kind of technique that they're using just within the walls themselves. It's a technique known as corbelling, where you just place one stone slightly in front of the other until it tapers up to the top, providing you with this kind of dome-shaped room within a block. So there's an example of a cell from Crosskirk in Caithness, and there's an example of the kind of single, unique cells themselves. You just need to imagine one of those within the walls, within the confines of a Broch wall itself. We also know again that these were multi-story structures. A great example of this is the scarcement ledge, which you can see just popping out from above head height to the entrance to Duntelf there. A small line of stones which jut out. Now, we believe that these scarcements were used to balance or to lay a floor on top. And you can see that on Clachtall in Sutherland as well. You can see a kind of ring around the wall or in the wall interior, which would have been used to support a floor, essentially. So there are several examples of these scarcement ledges, perhaps not going all the way around. It may have provided something of a kind of almost like a balcony or a veranda style structure, but certainly they were multi-floored. Now, Brochs themselves, though, the kind of footprint of Brochs, the design of Brochs, they are largely the same. They are mostly the kind of same kind of size. We're talking sort of 25, 30 feet across. You're talking maybe sort of 4 or 5 meters thick walls, 3 meters in some cases. Much and such the same. They're quite different to what we might call dunes. We find a lot of dunes on the west coast of Scotland and throughout the rest of Scotland too, but mostly concentrated in the west. These are much more different in terms of size and shape. They're more kind of oblong, but they can be D-shaped as well, if you like, D-shaped. They are much different, much more kind of varied rather in scope and scale as well, ranging from very small to almost impossibly huge. Eden's Hall, for example, being a great example of that. But Brochs themselves, they mostly feature the same characteristics. But going back to that Broch terminology, what makes a Broch? Is it the double wall? Is it the cells? Is it the kind of having that kind of regularity in shape and size? Is it the kind of date it can be dated to, essentially? Knivester Broch at the top right there, if you can make it out, which we're actually going to go and do some vegetation removal from this weekend, if anybody cares to join us. Knivester Broch doesn't really have any kind of features such as doesn't have any cells. It doesn't have a staircase running through it. It has a kind of village which has grown up around it, in fact, which makes it really interesting. But it doesn't necessarily feature all the kind of points that a typical Broch might share. So is it a Broch? It's difficult to tell. Certainly it's a monumental stone building which shares some characteristics and some similarities with other Brochs. But it's a point worth making that a lot of the time archaeologists use terminology and kind of references to help make understanding of the world and understanding of the monuments that we excavate. So what was viewed as a Broch now might not necessarily have been called a Broch 2,000 years ago. We don't really know, but certainly there is a tradition here of these kind of monumental stone buildings. When it comes to roofs, we are somewhat in the dark with this. No slates appear to have survived if it was slated. We're not too sure how the roof might have worked. There are some who posit that Brochs were always unroofed, and that they were used more as kind of a defensive lookout tower. But remember that all Brochs except Musa do not have access to the very top of the wall head. And I would also suggest, would you like to live in a house in Scotland without a roof? For those of you who have visited Scotland, you may have encountered on occasion some rain. For those of you who have not visited Scotland, please come to Scotland. It never rains. It's lovely here. But I would say that it would not be particularly clever to leave your Broch unroofed. And I think we can also look to the fact that Brochs and what we find in Brochs would point towards them being used for kind of domestic purposes or even kind of factorial industrious purposes as well. So lots of quernstones, things like that. Things that you would associate with a life being lived indoors, essentially. So we're really not too sure as to how the Brochs were roofed themselves, but that's part of the reason why the Caithness Broch project exists, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. So just to point out as well that Brochs You can find them spread throughout Scotland. This map's slightly out of date. It doesn't show you all the Brochs at all. There's probably something between 400 and 600 complex Atlantic roundhouses in Scotland, including dunes as well, which are very, like I say, similar to Brochs. Um, but Caithness has the lion's share of Brochs, and on top of that, I think it's really interesting to note the differences in regional Brochs as well. So the Brochs that you might find in Caithness are far different to the Brochs that you might find in the Western Isles. There's even potentially a Broch in England. I really love this study, which suggests that there is a building called Larroundale, which is based in the north of Scotland, in Berwick upon Tweed, which may have been home to a Broch. So if you get an opportunity, please read Catherine Kent's A Lost Southern Broch paper. I think it's tantalising. I think it's quite almost cheeky in a way, but I really like it. And it's important to remember, of course, that England and Scotland didn't exist back then, so it was just the kind of north of what we now know as Scotland. So it could well have been a Broch. I really like the research that's gone into that. But as I was saying, the regional differences can be laid bare when you look at the likes of Duncarloway here, sensational Broch, exceptional Broch, beautiful Broch on the Western Isles, which, as you can see here, stands alone as a single Broch tower. Whereas if you look at several Brochs located on the east coast of Caithness and Sutherland, Orkney and Shetland, you'll find that Brochs often have Broch villages, outbuilding structures associated with the Broch. Contemporaneous with the Broch, probably came after the Broch structure. You won't really find this in the west coast. So there are regional differences between Brochs in Scotland as well. There's another example of a wee Broch village that's at just a little bit north of Broch in the north of Scotland. And of course, Carnleath, which some of you may have seen if you were ever driving up the A9. It's a really fantastic example of a Broch. You can also see a lovely scarcement ledge on the interior there too. Broch purpose, I kind of alluded to that a moment ago, saying that Brochs may have been used for kind of a life lived, some sort of domestic purposes. Certainly, there are defensive aspects to Brochs, not least the kind of thickness of the walls. But you'll find things like door checks, which you would secure a wooden door most likely with, which you can see on the left-hand side there from the cairns. Green tullocks there, very under the radar Broch, but it's got these lovely kind of almost like moat-like structures, the kind of motte and bailey almost is how you might want to describe the defensive furrows which encircle this Broch. So there's several Brochs which seem to have been positioned on a kind of strategic level and then given further protection, whether interior kind of protection or kind of general landscaping to protect themselves from invaders. And so ultimately, I think that there certainly probably was a defensive purpose, but not exclusively, because in Brochs we find things that you would associate with domestic purposes. There's some weaving combs there from Nibster Broch and Caithness, and in Clachtal Broch you'll find the remains of at least one quernstone. But in the excavations themselves, they found around about a dozen quernstones. So you almost get a picture of this Broch being like a factory-like setting where they are constantly all grinding grain to provide food for the families and for the surrounding community. So they may have had different purposes. They may have had one purpose over a period of time. They may have had changed purposes. But I would posit that they are mostly almost comparable to kind of castles, in a sense that a castle is defensive and strategic at one point, but it's also where people live and work and play. It's almost like a proto castle. Well, you find some really fantastic finds at the Cairns Broch in Orkney, which I really recommend you go and visit, or you can look them up on Facebook. They are an ongoing archaeological excavation which has been going for about a decade now. Really quite interesting finds, a really in-depth, granular study of Brochs. And so if you want to know more about that, definitely recommend you give them a follow, or look out for any talks that Martin Carruthers, the dig director, leads. He is far more eloquent and academic than I am, that's for sure. I love the idea that there's almost a kind of, again, alluding to that idea of Brochs being like mini factories. They found dozens of these Broch molds at the Cairns Broch, and so it seems like they've specialised somewhat in the production of metal artifacts. Just as an aside, in a well-like structure at the cairns, they managed to find the cairns cog, a beautiful wooden bowl. Such a rare survivor of the Iron Age or of any sort of prehistory, really, are wooden objects. And so this gives us a really detailed insight into what sort of things people were using and producing. So the cairns cog is a wonderful story. Seems to have been broken at some point in its lifetime and then refixed with little kind of iron rivets. Again, please do go look up the cairns for more information on this. In terms of other finds that we make, they're kind of slightly more mysterious and difficult to explain. We have painted pebbles. We find these across the east coast of Caithness and Sutherland, as well in Orkney and Shetland too. And it could be that these painted pebbles, an example you can see on your left-hand side, may have just been people passing time. There's been a fairly recent craze for painting rocks and leaving them lying around the kind of landscape for people to find. And it may have been just that as our Iron Age equivalent. It may have been that there was a kind of ceremonial or a spiritual purpose to them, but we can't forget that sometimes people just like to doodle when they're bored. So I hope not too many of you are doodling just now. And then we've got a really interesting find from Hillhead Broch, known as the Pap, in Caithness, which seems to be an episode of trepanation, trepanning, whereby holes are drilled into someone's skull. And it was thought in the past that this could have been used to alleviate any sort of health problems or issues, in particular associated with the head. And I do think that my headache would be a lot stronger if this had happened to me. So we don't really know what's going on, what kind of practices and beliefs that these people were undertaking. Really quite interesting finds can be made at Brochs. But the Iron Age culture in general is not too finds heavy, and at Brochs they're often quite sterile sites. So finds like these are really special. Well, I think what I'd like to leave with you today, especially, is the fact that Brochs are not just objects in the landscape. They're not just monuments there to look at. These were places where people lived and where things changed over time for these people. And so did the Brochs themselves. A great example, going back to the initial Broch that I showed you, was Broch. Broch actually started off, or rather should I say, the site started off as a Neolithic tomb. So we're talking roughly 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. People were using this as a burial site for their ancestors. That would then become in the 8th century BC. So this is the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. People start to live there. So this has gone from almost like a burial ground to a house of some sort. After that, a souterrain is built in the 3rd and 4th centuries BC. A souterrain, if you're not familiar with the term, comes from the French sous, meaning under, and terrain, meaning ground. It's an underground structure, which may have been used as something ceremonial or spiritual, but it may have also been as simple as an Iron Age fridge, because it's a very constant temperature down there. So it might have been a storage place for grain or for foods. So it's gone from a tomb to a house to an underground passage, and then it becomes a broch. It becomes the first iteration of Broch. And the walls, they originally built them, are 3 meters thick, roughly 3 meters thick. That broch suffers a catastrophic collapse, but they don't leave. They just build it back bigger and better. And if you see there, the walls are now 5 meters thick. So what I want you to think of these archaeological monuments, I want you to think of all archaeological monuments actually as not static. They are evolving and growing and changing. Even now, they are changing in many ways. So it's important to just remember that these are special places for more than one reason. And we love them. We love Brochs at Caithness Broch Project. So we love them so much that we're going to try and build a Broch, a full-sized replica of a Broch. And so I think I'll just leave you with a quick video here. Well, I can put that away. Here we go. there we go. That is what we would like to achieve. That's a wonderful digital visualization of our flagship project, of our ultimate aim to construct a replica Broch by, I've actually managed to forget his name. That'll come back to me, I'm sure. Once I do remember, I'll come back to you. But he's a wonderful digital artist, and I think and I hope that it kind of shows the kind of what we're trying to achieve. And I've put music in with that because for two reasons. It's a video that lasts for about 30 seconds, and it can be a bit weird just watching a video that's very quiet. But the music itself was done by a kind of recording studio, Lord of the Isles and Firecracker Recordings. It was called Mactala Nan Criag, and that particular song was actually recorded, or pieces of that song were recorded in a broch, Castile Brugeg at Loch Alsh, which is very near to Elan Donan Castle. So do check it out if you're a fan of kind of slightly weird ambient proggish style music. But we're hoping to build a replica Broch in Caithness, and we have a variety of aims and ethoses that we're trying to fulfill by doing so. Number one is it's a huge piece of experimental archaeology. We are hoping that by attempting to build a Broch, or by building a Broch, we can understand a bit more how they were built, what practices were used, what works best, what doesn't work, what kind of roof they might have used, if at all. And also that kind of leads in or keys into an idea of why they were built as well. Through that, perhaps we can gain a kind of a better sense of our Iron Age predecessors as well. Perhaps we can begin to understand what kind of communal event this would have been and how it makes us feel as a people. If you think it's quite an adventurous archaeological project, I agree, it is. But there is precedent for this as well. In France, on your left-hand side there, you'll see Castle Guédelon, which is a 13th century reconstruction of a castle, which has been in the works now for a number of years. And they're attempting to do the same thing, albeit with a castle. But they're building it using all the kind of authentic techniques and methods as would have been available to medieval builders 700 years ago. And on the right is the former Crannog Centre at Loch Tay, hoping that some of you managed to visit it before it sadly burnt down a couple of years ago. But it basically started its life as an experimental archaeology project and then latterly became a visitor attraction in its own right. I'm pleased to say that despite it burning down, they managed to relocate to the other side of Loch Tay, and they are in the process of building a second one. I was there a few weeks ago, and it's a really amazing place. Highly recommend it. The second part of our project is to continue and to promote and to really kind of breathe life into certain traditional skills in Caithness. Flagstone works, the production of flagstone and dry stone diking were skills which have been endemic to Caithness, so important to Caithness and in both the economy and the kind of social sphere of Caithness over the last hundreds of years. But there's very few dikers left now with the skills that can be passed on to the next generation. So we would be very keen to promote those. On top of that, there is a wide range of skills, ancient kind of techniques ranging from joinery to thatching to cooking, smelting. All sorts of things can be kind of got at through this project. But finally, our kind of main aim is that we are creating an iconic tourist attraction for Caithness. And I hope you'll agree that this is the sort of thing that you'd be intrigued to visit, and it would encourage to entice you up to the area. And that's particularly important. In fact, it's one of the reasons that this project really was kick-started, is to ensure that Caithness, my home county, where I've lived for over 30 years now, has a sort of second chance. And that's because Caithness was largely a very quiet part of Scotland for hundreds of years. We didn't cause too much trouble, I have to say, up in these parts. That is until about the 1950s, when nuclear power begins to rear its head. And Caithness was chosen, perhaps unsurprisingly given its remoteness, to be the build site for the UK's first prototype fast breeder reactor. This is Dounreay. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have passed it, but it has been an incredibly important asset, really, to the county. I mean, it bucked the trend of falling population, which had really been falling since the 1840s. It brought swathes of people to the county, thousands of people. At its height, it employed about 3,000 employees. And you must remember that Caithness is the population was very little over 15,000 at the time of its arrival. So Dounreay now counts for about 1 in every 5 jobs in the area. It presently contributes £68 million into the local economy, and there's roughly about 1,200 employees at Dounreay now. So I will just move on to the next screen, sorry. So I'm hoping that demonstrates how important Dounreay has been. Dounreay is now, however, the best part of 70 years old and is now being decommissioned. And once it's gone, it is gone. There is a document which suggests that Dounreay will be decommissioned by 2036. I don't think that's true at all, but it may be roughly within my lifetime that Dounreay is no more. And so what happens to Caithness then is entirely within our hands. But what's on the table for Caithness, or what's been projected for Caithness, is not particularly good news. In fact, the Highland Council has released figures which suggest that Caithness will lose over 20% of its population over the next 20 years. And these figures are comparable to the Highland clearances and how they affected Caithness over 200 years ago. This will be a pretty staggering effect on the region if it happens. And you can see that as well with the loss of pupils to the area, loss of people, loss of families, and this is because of loss of jobs. As simple as that. If you want to retain a population and if you want to ensure that your society is thriving, try and keep your population at a steady level. You don't want to start losing people in their droves. So we at Caithness Broch Project, myself and Ian, looked elsewhere for inspiration, and you can't get much more inspirational than the archaeology of Orkney, which attracts so many people to the area. Orkney makes about £67 million from tourism a year. Lots of cruise ships, lots of visitors, lots of jobs, in that case, centred around tourism. So remember, Dounreay makes £68 million, whereas Orkney makes £67 million from tourism. And tourism in Orkney is not particularly finite. It's not going anywhere fast, I would say. A lot of people visit Orkney, of course, for history and archaeology. My number one reason to visit Orkney, however, is to visit the Gurness Broch cat, who is a delight. So if you're ever over in Orkney, do visit Gurness Broch, because there's several reasons to enjoy that. There's several similar stories over in the Western Isle where it's thought that the contribution of heritage and archaeology makes around about £4 million for the area. So this played into some of my own studies as well at the University of Glasgow. Caithness had never had a tourism report produced specifically for Caithness, so I believe I'm one of the first people to undertake that. And I was able to discern that the sort of total economic value of tourism to Caithness is roughly £33.5 million, of which £6.5 million can be derived from heritage tourism. So it's big money to the area. I'm duty bound to include this photograph of me winning the best undergraduate dissertation in Scotland, awarded by Archaeology Scotland. Thank you. I just include this for my mum every time. So going back to Brochs, why did we decide on Brochs? Well, it's evident, it's clear to see that there is a huge number of Brochs in Caithness. In fact, Caithness has more Brochs than anywhere else in Scotland. I'm not going to say that these Brochs are particularly special or awe-inspiring like the ones you might see in Skye, Lewis, Western Isles, Orkney, Shetland. We have not the best Brochs. So we want to build the best Broch. You can see here that we have roughly 180 or so Brochs, between 180 200 Brochs. So I do like to think of Caithness as the home of the Broch. Just if you're interested, Sutherland has about 100 or so as well. But archaeology and Caithness have something of a kind of difficult relationship. Caithness has never really needed to promote itself as a tourism destination, precisely because Dounreay has catered for so many jobs for so long. And of course, there's the traditional sectors of fishing and farming. Caithness has a wealth of archaeology. In this map, for instance, you will see a number of Brochs, cairns, things like that. You might think there's maybe 20 to 30 sites here of archaeological interest. Well, there's about that many archaeological sites. Now, granted, some of these are dry stone dikes or farmhouses or maybe walls, rig and furrows, etc. Not the things that you would associate with heritage tourism, but it's plain to see that there is a lot of history and archaeology in the county. This is a map by Andy Heald, which shows the extent of these archaeological sites, actually. It's positively littered with archaeology. And so Caithness has never really marketed itself as a heritage tourism destination, but we want to promote it as such because we think it has great potential. This is something that the Visit Scotland chairman, John Thurzo, who himself hails from Caithness, has noted. He's noted the difficulties in highlighting Caithness as a heritage tourism destination. He says himself, a particular bête noire of the Scottish tourism industry is to cut the map off at Inverness, which is perhaps a little bit disappointing to hear. And then in my own line of work in tourism, I have come across several comments which seem to misunderstand, misrepresent Caithness. It is flat. There is no doubt about that. It is not the kind of visceral, traditional view of Scotland, which is, of course, of glens and lochs and trees, perhaps something much more dramatic. The landscape changes in Caithness, and if you want to see dramatic landscape, then stick to the coast. But we find comments like, "Sorry, Caithness, but now having photographed in every county of mainland Britain, I find you the most depressing of the lot." And I have to say, this has given me something of a condition as a lifelong fan of Caithness. I now find myself going into the likes of Waterstones and rifling through the back to the bibliography and to the index and seeing how many mentions Orkney gets compared to Caithness. And inevitably, Orkney always trumps Caithness. That is until one day I chanced upon a book where Caithness had more mentions than Orkney. Now, perhaps this was not the book for Caithness to feature more than Orkney because it was Slaves and Highlanders, Silence Histories of Scotland and the Caribbean. So perhaps less about that, the better. But there is a historic kind of misrepresentation of Caithness as well. I mean, this goes way back to George Lowe's tour through Orkney and Shetland, where he travels through Caithness and passes comment on the people of Stroma, Caithness's only island, way back in 1774. He says, "The men are stout, hardy spadesmen, as was said before. The women, while young, are tolerably well looked, but as they advance in age, grow very hard favoured, acquiring a peculiar ghastliness in their countenances, contrary to what is observed of the women in Orkney," which is hardly a positive recommendation. So I'm going to quickly talk about now so there's challenges ahead essentially, and we recognise that, but we had to start somewhere. Because you may or may not know it, I only graduated from university a few years ago. And this project has been on the go for over a decade. We started this is really grassroots, community-led stuff. This is not from the outside. This is not a university coming in. This is not a group of well-educated people who started this project. I worked in a call centre and my colleague's a builder. But we had a bit of a belief and we had some commitment and enthusiasm to bettering our lives and the lives of our friends. So we're going to go back to 2013. This is us at our kind of one of our first archaeological digs that we helped out in, and we were just very keen to meet other like-minded people and to share our story. And we did that really, I think. We were one of maybe perhaps the first organisations to really utilise social media and archaeology. And I'll just brush through these because I don't know how many people are interested in the social media of the Broch project, but it has been integral to our success. We now have roughly 20,000 followers across well over 20,000 followers. We have roughly over 30,000 followers. And this is a hypothetical project. We just share stories of Caithness and archaeology as much as we can. There's one thing I've learned, it's that cats and archaeology go particularly well. This image often goes viral. We've done things like the official World Cup of Brochs, which was obviously won by Musa. But we've really made it our passion to communicate archaeology to as many people as possible. There is a view of archaeology being dull and dry, and I go to great pains to make sure that people know that archaeology can be very exciting. And I was very pleased to kind of put our archaeology across in a way which was fun and accessible, irreverent. And we've received some really fantastic plaudits, and I think it goes for all projects and activities that you may be involved in. Try and remind yourself that you're doing a good job. It's too easy to focus on the negative things. But I was very pleased to see things like Jenny saying always wished that a group would make archaeology accessible to the Caithness public. Wotton Primary School raising £500 for us, inspired by our social media. This is something from 2021, I believe. Glenn has just tuned into the Zoom call for the Caithness Broch talk. He says this is the best thing he has done during lockdown and loved every minute of it, which was very close to making me cry. More messages saying, enriching my life with these posts. And perhaps my favourite one was, "You're one of the main reasons I started studying archaeology." So there you go. There is some inspiration that you can make things accessible to people and that you can make them entertaining. And one of these things is archaeology. It's not just through social media. We've kind of done more kind of traditional advertising campaigns, shall we say. I will just play this short little clip. It's really lovely.
Who we are now is defined by who we were. One of the good things about Brochs is there's always a really interesting walk to get to them. So half the enjoyment is the journey to get to the Broch and back again. And Caithness has got more of them than anywhere else in Scotland. It's great for the kids to see our history and the beautiful landscape that we live in.
Isn't that a lovely video? I think that's really special. That's Don Mackay there from the Caithness Broch project, and we featured as part of a kind of Highlands and Islands wide push for tourism out to Caithness and Sutherland. We've also appeared on television. Here I am with BBC Scotland's Dougie Vipond, giving him a wee tour of Caithness and their Broch sites and their historic sites. If there's one thing I've learnt, and this may be lost on some of our European followers, but if there's one thing I've learnt, it's do not Google yourself after you appear on television. Jay Cormack says, just notice the picture here. Why is Dougie Vipond speaking with one of the Jedward twins? So there's the Jedward twins, by the way. That's them and that's me. I don't think there's any particular resemblance. I could be wrong. But let that be a lesson to you. And I actually watched the episode on BBC and on the boat over to Orkney, and my phone started going off with a dozen or so messages coming in. Each message congratulating me for a good appearance, but also commenting on how terrified Dougie Vipond looked to be a passenger in my car. There's a face of regret. But we had to start small. We had to start somewhere once we had kind of got the word out about our project. And so from then on in, we've been involved in a number of small archaeological projects. We started in 2015 with a pitching competition. We pitched our idea to install some interpretation panels and produce an archaeology leaflet to a group of 120 members of the public. And we came out of that with 80% of the vote. And I think that details or highlights how much people in Caithness want to see change. We also organised a number of excavations with people who'd never done archaeology before. This was at Thusiter, just outside of Caithness, just outside of Thurso. Really fantastic, probably late Bronze Age site, early Iron Age, not a Broch site as such. We've got some wonderful finds, including a pig's canine as well. So this was probably quite a high status site. Even managed to find the hearth, and this is just within about 2-3 days of digging. So really quite exciting. Always keen to engage schools. If you're not engaging schools, then what is the point? Because everything we do is for everyone else, especially the next generation. School children are not scary at all. If you've ever thought about doing anything like this, get involved with them, get them enthused, get them energised about archaeology. We've done things like the Lego Broch, which you can go and visit in the North Coast Visitor Centre in Thurso. 10,000 pieces. Resplendent Broch there, and it even has its own little Lego goats. We did events around Minecraft. If you're going to do things with children, try and do things that will entertain them. So try and get them on their level. Minecraft is very much on their level. So we did lots of events around the Broch and around that as well. Really pleased with some of the feedback that we got for that. Apparently, this is the best Lego Broch in the world, which I thought was wonderful feedback. Until my friend pointed out that it's also the only Lego Broch in the world. I'm going to leave this quote here. When you told me how big a Broch was in real life, this is from Somerso, age 10, about 10 years ago now. We're going to come back to that at the end. But remember that. When you told me how big a Broch was in real life, something happened. We've also then moved on to kind of more physical changes in the landscape. So here's Achvarisdale Broch, roughly 2015. inundated with giant hogweed, which we then decided to clear out and make it much more accessible. So that was the results, the fruits of our labour, something which is kind of much more aesthetically pleasing, and you can easily understand it, and more importantly, you can access it safely. But in 2015, we instigated our biggest project to date. It's located at Owsdale, just 10 minutes north of Helmsdale, a few minutes south of Berriedale and Caithness. It was described as Colleen Beatty as one of the best preserved Brochs in Scotland, and here it is in 2013. And when we revisited it in 2015, it was a shadow of its former self. What you can see there is actually the buttress to the left of that kind of opening. That buttress was constructed by the Broch's original excavator, Mr. Mackay, in 1891. And it is the first thing that's gone. Out of that 2,000-year-old structure, the buttress seems to have been the 150-year-old buttress is the first thing that goes. So these evidence, if anything, that the Broch builders knew what they were doing. We managed to conserve that Broch, make it much more safer to visit and easy to access. You can see a top-down view here. We had to remove a tree. It was a rowan tree, which is actually apparently bad luck to cut down, but we had to remove it. We also built a car park because we realised it's not just about making the Broch safe to visit. We need to make it easy to visit. So we have a kind of a tourist mindset on things too. So we built a car park, and within the first month, a caravan was fly tipped on it. We got rid of that caravan, and another caravan was fly tipped on it almost immediately after, which was quite annoying. So there is security cameras there now, so don't try it again. And then we had 1 kilometre of path from that car park all the way down to the Broch, which skirts this beautiful village, this post-medieval clearance village called Borg, which you can see in the middle of the screen there. Really quite a fantastic example. Borg, by the way, of course, meaning or is the kind of old Danish term, or Norse term rather, for Broch. So they've obviously named that village after the Broch Owsdale. And I love the fact that we were able to acquire 2 photographs of residents of Borg as well. Robert Sutherland there on the left-hand side, born around about 1768, and his wife Christina there on the right, both lived at Borg. I love this photograph because Robert looks utterly terrified off the camera. So please do visit Owsdale Broch. It's maybe the gem in what we've achieved so far. It's a really lovely walk. So yes, please do visit Caithness, and when you do visit Owsdale Broch. Last 5 minutes I'm going to spend on building a Broch, and then after that we'll open up to some questions. This is the part that Ian normally sort of delivers to the audience, because he is a builder. He has a much better working knowledge of building terms and techniques, and he's the one that's really been driving this forward as well. But just to point out that we're not the first people to discuss building a Broch. Alexander Rind, noted archaeologist from Caithness, in 1851, he said that they still have Brochs essentially, and to produce examples of these and of such like could not involve any extravagant expenditure. And he feels assured, even after making large deductions for his own antiquarian predilections, that the outlay would be fully justified by the interest taken in its results. So he's basically saying it would be worth it to build a Broch, and I concur. Well, essentially, we've taken prehistoric inspiration for our own Broch. So we've tried to utilise Brochs which already exist, and we've taken elements from them, such as the triangular lintel at the top left-hand side there from Culswick Broch. We'd love to have a triangular lintel because they look really cool. We have the kind of relative size and silhouette from Duntelve. And we have a doorway from Carnleath, and we've chosen that doorway in particular because it is wide enough and high enough. And we're building a prehistoric Broch, but we are probably going to have to contend with 21st century regulations as well, meaning that we need to make this as accessible as possible. And the doorway from Carnleath, you can get a wheelchair through. So we are taking a literal example of a prehistoric Broch, but we are applying it to a modern day template, if you like, for allowing accessibility. So there's no corners cut there. We are still using prehistoric inspiration. Now, my colleague Ian has been kind of responsible for designing the initial concept, if you like. Here is his drawing of kind of what he imagined. And then this was turned into a really beautiful 3D image by our graphic designer, whose name I will hopefully come back to me by the end of this talk. Here you can see a few shots of what we imagine this might look like. We've tried to make it big enough and exciting enough for people to visit so that they might spend an hour or so wandering through the Broch itself and through the outbuildings. Remember, Caithness is one of the areas where a Broch village grew up or would have kind of been developed. So we have included a Broch village. In terms of the structure, relatively straightforward. What we've done is we've again taken the floor plan, and I apologise for the quality of this image, but we've taken the general floor plan of the Cairnsbroch in Orkney, and we've applied that to our own Broch. And here you can see it. We've got kind of stone compartments or dividers, which split the Broch up into different rooms. Great example of that can be found at Midhow, by the way, if you want to find these kind of orthostats and these kind of standing stones, which seem to delineate different spaces. Probably quite dark in there. We might have to have some candles. They may need to be electric candles given the kind of fire constraints that we need to be aware of. But I hope this gives you a general idea of the size and scope of what we're trying to achieve. We'll take you up to the first floor, certainly, perhaps to the second floor. But remember, as I said, that these Broch walls eventually taper in against each other, providing a kind of bulwark against each other, kind of buttressing one another. So it actually strengthens the structure. So we probably won't have access to the wall head, but we've used existing archaeology to help inform our first floor, because anything past ground floor becomes a bit more conjectural. But at Clachtall Broch, they found evidence of charred kind of matting, wattle and daub, reed matting as well, which seems to have been perfectly frozen in time, perfectly preserved after a catastrophic fire burnt through the entire Broch. And what's happened after that is the floor seems to put the fire out immediately. But because it was burnt, it means that the organic materials are preserved much better than they would have without being charred, essentially. But we've taken existing archaeological research and applied it to our own Broch as well. Once it gets to the third floor, again, it's not quite speculation, but this is where the experimental archaeology really kicks in, and we'll have to decide, well, what works best? You may have seen images of Brochs where they hang fish from the roofs, so that the fire which rises, or the smoke that rises from the hearth, passes through and gives the fish a kind of smokiness. It may have been that this was like a kiln, kind of drying, a sort of malting floor, a kind of drying floor. So it's not quite speculation, but at this point it does become truly experimental, quite unique in that sense. So lots of activities will be going on in the Broch, of course. We want this to be a living, breathing, immersive experience. You'll get to try your hand at maybe weaving, or maybe some leather tanning activities, cooking, perhaps not swinging a sword around. We'll leave that to the experts, but you'll be able to watch some of this stuff as well. So in terms of where we are just now, for people who are interested, we have over the last 2 years been on the lookout for a site. We investigated over 40 sites in Caithness and 1 in Sutherland. Eventually, we have decided on a site in the south of Caithness. Lots of ground on offer here, a really spectacular view, and actually there are Brochs nearby. We've got 3 examples of Brochs in the nearby vicinity. So it kind of archaeologically makes sense as well as that. We're working with Project Brief development consultants, Hamilton Hay Van Jonker. They're helping us to design and to kind of understand how to go about building this, because this is a bit like a theme park is what we're building essentially. If you can imagine trying to build a theme park, where do you start? How do you build it? What sort of things do you need? So we are in the process of trying to understand where the visitor centre goes. Should there be a visitor centre at this stage? What will it look like? How many millions of pounds is this going to cost? Because this is a multi-million pound experimental archaeology project. It's really quite big. We can't hope to do this without some sort of professional background, professional interest. But this is a kind of visualization of what we're hoping to achieve. And as Alexander Ryan said, I think the outlay is fully justified by the results. I hope this is something that you would come to visit, and I certainly think that this is something that Caithness deserves. So please do keep up to date with our developments on Facebook, on Instagram. You can go to our website and join our newsletter, because I think archaeology and Brochs are inspiring. I hope that our project is leading the way, and certainly for some or so, who attended that archaeological event so many years ago, I'd like to think it was quite inspiring, because she said, when you told me how big a Broch was in real life, my head blew off. So hopefully I'm not blowing too many brain cells here today, but if you are interested in learning more, please, please, please do visit our website, become a friend, donate, check out our adventure map, buy some merchandise, ask us questions. We're more than happy to speak to people if they're interested in volunteering, or if they just have a general question about Brochs. We're pretty Broch mad. But thanks for listening. I really do appreciate your time, and cheers.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. That was really interesting and very in-depth. If you're happy to take a few questions, I have also put the link to your website in the chat there so that people can click on that if they want to find out more and support your project.
Yep.
So I've got a few questions in the chat here. One question is, how old is the term Broch itself? Do you know?
I don't think I know, to be honest, but I know that it's derived from Borg, which is the kind of Norse term for fortification. So this is, you would have seen the village of Borg there. So they've taken their name from the Broch itself, and it's just evolved eventually into Broch. There is also some arguments that it's come from the southern Broch, which also means fortification. There's a term for it for two names basically meaning the same thing, but Broch will be hundreds of years old, if not a few thousand.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. One person here has asked, where are you planning on quarrying your stone for the Broch itself when you build it?
Well, we have some pretty good relations with the quarries in Caithness. And interestingly enough, they're not too interested in the stuff which the Broch builders would have got to. The good stuff is a bit further down in the earth, basically. So we should hopefully be able to get that stuff for fairly cheap. We will, of course, want to work with the best building materials, so there might be some cost attached to it, but we're not needing to dynamite stuff out as such. It's the transportation which will probably cost a little bit more. So whereas we think we can get most of the stone almost on a donation basis, it's transporting it from site. But with that in mind too, we will probably look to do a bit of quarrying ourselves just to see how exactly stone was quarried, but it wouldn't be too feasible to do the entire project that way. There will be some cost limitations there, and I think we have to make some compromises in terms of achieving our goals and also doing the kind of experimental archaeology stuff. So certainly everything else will kind of be done on a experimental kind of authentic basis, if you like. But the quarrying, I think we will probably look to kind of have more slightly modern methods for most of that. But certainly we would look to do some quarrying ourselves.
Okay, thank you. And then another question we have here is, and I know in a lot of your images there, the Brochs were shown with slanted roofs. So one person's asked, he's always wondered what type of roofs were on a Broch. Are we certain whether they were flat or slanted?
Well, we've looked at, there is actually more slides on this, but we'll just try and breeze through as many questions as possible. Maybe we'll put something up on Facebook. We've looked to kind of the black houses in the Western Isles, which were used for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's from not long after the time of the Broch, where they appear to be kind of thatched houses, thatched roofs, weighed down by stones. That seems to be, again, this is an experimental project, so that seems like a fairly practical and viable way to build a Broch roof. We also held a symposium a few years ago with experts from across the UK, Broch experts, heritage, craftspeople, trade fellows, these kind of people who are well versed in constructing authentic or traditional buildings. And it was really interesting to hear the thoughts on those behind Butser Ancient Farm in England, where they discussed the way that we were always somewhat concerned by the kind of high, the velocity of wind up in Caithness, which can really take the face off you. If anyone's been up this north, know it's especially windy. And we were concerned that how will this affect our Broch? And actually, I forget his name, but he was a really lovely chap. He was involved with Butser Farm, and he said that the wind just passes through thatched buildings like a ripple almost, and it was a beautiful thing to watch from inside. So really interesting to hear the thoughts. But like I say, we're taking a lot of what we know already from history and applying it to our Broch. And a lot of it is experimental. So we will find out if a flat roof would work or a slanted roof, or what angle or what kind of degree would work best with, dealing with runoff from rain, from dealing with the wind, from dealing with, animals nesting in them, things like that. Really quite a lot to consider. But like I say, experimental archaeology project, I'm sure we will have probably several designs or several attempts as well to see what works best.
Okay, thank you. And we'll just go with one last question, given the time. Someone's asked a question about why are Brochs in the Outer Hebrides called duns on the OS map, and do crannogs only ever have duns built in them? I think there's a lot of confusion around duns, Brochs, and crannogs.
Um, that I am not too sure why, because arguably Dun Carlowy is a Broch. So it gets a bit more confusing. These are names that have just been applied traditionally in many instances. So a lot of these names pre-Ordnance Survey have been taken from the name book. People will just use the term Dun or Dun because that was quite a common thing to use in the Western Isles. Perhaps that was their original name. Perhaps that's what they called Brochs and Caithness. Don't really know. But the Brochs and Duns are much and such the same. They differ somewhat. But that's really getting into the weeds of it. All you really need to concern yourself with is that they are monumental stone structures that are vaguely Broch-like. I think that would be the answer there, is to not concern yourself too much with that.
Yeah, okay. I have also put in the chat a link to the Highland Archaeological Research Framework, because they've got quite a good section in there about Brochs and duns and buildings from the Iron Age in the Highlands. So if anyone wants to read more about them, they can have a look there. Okay, well, I guess all it's left to say is thank you very much, Ken, for taking the time to give this talk. It was really interesting and thorough, and I guess just want to wish you well with the support for the project. It would be fantastic. I don't know if you can say kind of where you've got to with the funding for the project, because obviously I've also put the link there if anyone wants to support you. Or has any ideas, I guess, about additional funding for it. Yeah, so just to know where you've got to in terms of the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are just we've put in the planning application for a Broch to be built in Caithness, which was quite funny to see that in the newspapers. I don't know how many European people have attended this, and I don't know how the planning system works in Europe, but in Scotland, people are made aware through notices put in the newspaper. So the newspaper or the planning notice board, if you like, from the newspaper said, planning application for a 2,000-year-old structure known as a Broch located here. And underneath that was Polycrub. Two very different planning applications. So we've got the planning application in. Once we've secured all of that, that basically gives us the okay to build a Broch. But we need to buy the site, and then we need to obviously build the Broch. There's a few other things that we do need to do. On top of that, we will need to fundraise for that. So again, if people wish to donate, any amount is very much appreciated. It all goes towards the construction of this Broch. If you can link us up with people who might have some more money and might be interested in attaching their name to this, then wonderful. We're open to sponsorship and ways of working with other organisations or individuals, philanthropists. But I expect, hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, that we will have acquired the site. We'll own the ground. It's 200 acres. It's a sizable amount of land. And from then on in, we can start looking at fundraising towards the construction of the first Broch in Scotland for 2,000 years.
Well, that would be amazing to see that. I'm sure there'd be lots of people who want to come and help you build it as well. Okay, so I suppose also thanks to everybody who's joined today, and thank you for your interesting questions. and for taking part in our event today, which, as I say, was part of European Archaeology Days. And this is really just to also showcase the kind of event that would take place in Scottish Archaeology Month, which is the festival that I run for Archaeology Scotland. So if you want to find out any more about that, or have an event that you want to put on in the programme, please just get in touch with me. It's SAM, S-A-M, at archaeologyscotland.org.uk. And if you want to find out any more about the Broch project, I'm sure Ken would be happy to take emails from you directly to the Caithness Broch project. And if you want to find out anything more about Archaeology Scotland or what we do, just visit our website. Okay, so thank you very much for being part of today's event. And I'll close the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay.